That's it? Okay. That will lead us into number 3 from Citizens Corporation Counsel Akil, communication regarding the proposed safe house ordinance.
Thank you, Chairman. The following narrative is actually was promulgated by Councilwoman Sharon McClinton. It is a proposal for a safe storage ordinance. It's been passed and implemented in the city of Buffalo. However, whether it's been challenged or whether it's been faced with resistance has yet to be known. Points of contest I've labeled, one of which is that it has been found in a landmark constitutional U.S. Constitution case, Heller v. District of Columbia, that a general requirement that firearms be locked in a safe or that there be a trigger lock on a firearm is in violation of our Second Amendment right to bear arms. In theory, everyone has a right, if they have a license to possess a firearm, to have it at their disposal for purposes, obviously, for self-defense of the home and family. The City of Buffalo's ordinance, in an effort to vitiate or get around that our Second Amendment rights, has left an exception. The exception being that if the firearm is on the owner's body or within close proximity so as the owner can retrieve it within an arm's reach, is my interpretation, then it would not be in violation of their Second Amendment rights. I just want to point that out, that there may be faced with some resistance and may be challenged on a constitutional level. Also, I just want to make note that enforcement would also be an issue. I know in the state of Florida, the only way you could be found liable of being in violation of this type of ordinance, in Florida they have the child access prevention law. So the only way they could be found liable is if, in fact, someone other than the owner who, without lawful permission or gains access to the firearm, uses it in an unlawful manner, or is found to be in possession of such firearm. Any questions or comments?
Ms. McClinton?
Statistically, NYAGU is in New York against gun violence. Any owner of a revolver is responsible for its storage. Mainly what we're looking at, there's no reason why a child needs to have accessibility. Statistical data will be presented to you when it's brought back before us again, but this is just a presentation to my colleagues, letting them know that this is something I'm working on to change that. In each household, gun violence is the second leading cause of death among American children. And in ages 0 to 18, a child is killed or injured every 30 minutes. So statistically, this is something that really needs to be looked at in the city of Poughkeepsie alone. The data and information I've retrieved from our PD department shows how many children are actually committing crimes here with guns, that they're not registered to them, and some are being used by people in households where they are. Also, accessibility for people who have mental illness is leading to a lot of, which I'll give you the information on that at that time as well, but people with mental illness who are committing suicide. This is a prevention of it and making you being responsible, something that we seem not to be doing when our children are having easy access to weapons, or people who are depressed or having access to weapons that are choosing to have in a household. It's not to interfere with someone's constitutional right to bear arms. What it's making is to make you be responsible for that arms. And it's a lot of movement all over the country, not just here, but mainly based in New York City. And through the help of the group, and mainly a woman who reached out to me, Mrs. Ruff, to bring it here to the city of Poughkeepsie where it's greatly needed. Some people will be here present on the 20th when we meet again to present exactly what it's about, why they've issued it, and why we fight here in New York State for our children. They're our future, and it's getting warm. People are getting careless, and day after day after day, like I said, every 30 minutes a child dies uselessly at the hands of a weapon that was not secured properly. That's not a violation of your constitutional right. It's a violation of a person's right who didn't know that it was a revolver. What do you tell a 2-year-old who picks up a gun, or a 5-year-old, that it's a water gun? and he accidentally shoots someone, or someone who robs and murders with a weapon registered to somewhere else, you need to be responsible, and I don't think that's too much to ask for you to be able to have it in a locked storage. I grew up with that. I grew up with hunters. Wasn't a problem to me. And I'm going to push for it. And I just ask my colleagues to look at that. It's one of the things that we have here. We have gun crimes here. And I spoke with my chairman, and he also is looking into the matter, too, of how we can actually go about making this be a reality in the city of Poughkeepsie, making it harder for our youth to possess and utilize weapons.
Thank you. Ms. Berry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe you said that Buffalo is the only place so far where this law has been enacted?
I don't know if it's the only municipality. I just know that it is a large municipality that has implemented this ordinance. In fact, the language in the proposed safe storage ordinance that I've drafted is taken from the City of Buffalo's ordinance.
So if it's challenged in court and we have passed it here, what is the situation with that?
If it's challenged in court and it's passed here, the situation will be, it will be a precedent. Therefore, we'd have to answer to those who would be opposed to it, and remove it from our city code.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you for the communication. No questions or comments.
Mr. Klein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Akil, thank you for your presentation. The case I do appreciate your briefing it out. The points of contest, the second bullet item, Heller versus District of Columbia, that's still positive case law, correct?
Yes, it is.
From the Supreme Court of the United States, correct?
Yes, it is. 2008 case.
Yeah, my concern with this ordinance, quite frankly, is that it seems to be a solution in search of a problem. The problem we have in the city of Poughkeepsie and in many other places is homicidal young men tracking and hunting down other homicidal young men in the city of Poughkeepsie. And in one instance, we had a homicidal young man or more track someone down to New Paltz. And that's the issue. The stats don't, there may be stats regarding accidental discharge of weapons. The difficulty also is that there are stats regarding home invasions and people having guns available and readily accessible for the defending themselves, which is the gist of Heller versus District of Columbia, which is why the District of Columbia law was struck down as being in violation of the Second Amendment. I find these efforts to be, Mr. Akil, an effort at focusing on law-abiding citizens and exposing them to potential criminality, or at the very least potential civil liability for inadequate storage or inadequate securing of their firearms. And it also will, it's part of an ongoing effort nationwide to take the focus off violent criminals who have no regard whatsoever for firearms laws of any kind, whether it's storage, possession, or whatever, and put it on otherwise law-abiding citizens who may find themselves inadvertently in violation of the law, subject to criminal liability and civil liability, and then having to go out and buy onerous insurance policies at onerous premiums, and having to buy so-called securing devices, and then having no access to their firearms in a moment of urgent need. That's the difficulty that I have with these things, and then they become simply someone else to name in a civil lawsuit if there's an allegation that they didn't adequately secure their firearm, which got in the hands of someone else. That's the difficulty I have with these laws, is that the focus is off violent criminals. Unless and until, the reality is I lived in D.C. I lived in D.C. before there was Heller versus District of Columbia, and people blamed lax laws in Maryland and Virginia for the fact that people in the District of Columbia took guns out that were illegally possessed, that you can go to prison for walking around with them in your pocket, and they took them out and put them against people's heads and pulled the trigger. I worked at a bank on 7 blocks from the Capitol, where a woman running an ice cream stand was shot in the leg and robbed in broad daylight. I'm sure not from someone who was legally possessing the firearm, and it wasn't a function of inadequate securing. And one Monday morning I came to work, and the deli next door, the owner was wrapping up late at night on Saturday night and had a gun put to his head, and he was laid out on the floor and killed. I'm sure not because of inadequate securing of firearms, not because of any gun laws, but because outlaws took what they wanted, including not just money but lives. These laws are wrong-headed, and they focus, again, on law-abiding citizens and not on violent criminals who don't care about possession, don't care about loading, don't care about pointing, don't care about firing. So I would urge my colleagues to consider this proposed ordinance to be, again, a solution in search of a problem that does not really exist in this city. And the notion that, well, that we have to just, in general, make sure guns are as secured as possible, that's not the issue in the city of Poughkeepsie and many other places. The carnage that takes place every day in growing numbers in New York City and in Chicago, for instance, isn't based upon a lack of security of firearms. It's based upon violence. It's based upon young folks who don't care about any kind of law and are willing to kill other people for nothing. That's the problem we have in our country. And we have, by the way, a Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, a federal law enforcement agency tasked specifically to address gun running and illegal possession of firearms. We don't hear these stats from them. These are the folks who handle this stuff directly, and we're not hearing these kinds of initiatives coming from them. Thank you, Mr. Akil. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Herman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Keel. Thank you, Ms. McClinton. I certainly advocate for greater protections of our citizenry and of our children. I think that this potential resolution or law could be a little more saleable if we could gather some data from our police department. I'm not sure how much data they would have on whether or not, or what percentage of the gun crimes in the city over the last measurable amount of time was a result of greater access to firearms that could have been prevented if, in fact, those firearms had been locked up. I'd be interested to see if that is indeed a stat that we keep, and if that was indeed the case, then it might in fact be something where it's not necessarily a solution in search of a problem, but a fix to an opportunity for us to affect how people, to prevent violence and to prevent children and others from getting access to guns that they may otherwise not have access to. So I'd certainly be willing to hear more about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mallory?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Assistant Corporation Counsel, for this information, and all, and for the council bringing this to our attention. I do have to, though, echo what the majority leader had just shared. Does our police department have stats to provide us information?
Yes.
And if so, could we work on getting us that information so we can gather more about this? Because as the majority leader says, if it's preventing something that's happening in our community, I'm for it all. But I do like to read more about this. Thank you for the point of contest education, but I look forward to hearing more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the paper you gave me, is the ordinance that we're thinking of, proposed safe storage ordinance, all in that one paragraph?
Yes, it is.
Okay, because I was kind of wondering, then you had points of contest. That wouldn't be in the ordinance.
No, that would
Okay.
not. Okay.
All right. The only thing I could think of is that you might give Buffalo a call and ask them if they have any advice or information that might be useful to us, because we're considering an ordinance that they have considered. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're willing to talk, sometimes not, but I think Buffalo probably would enjoy talking to you about their new ordinance, because it must have made some headlines up there.
It's on my next agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
I have no comments. I think everybody pretty much summed them up.
Can I just add one more thing,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, real briefly? Also, an ordinance like this might provide a basis for law enforcement to find other reasons to engage in the seeking of search warrants to enter someone's home upon information that there was an unsecured firearm in there, and you'll have police being tasked to go into break into folks' homes on the basis of a search warrant, on the basis of information that someone has an unsecured or inadequately secured firearm. That's what the Fourth Amendment is supposed to prevent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9. Any questions on any of those before we refer them to?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
may
sorry.
I? Number 9, Corporation Council, that's not the address of their establishment. So we need to,
See their home address.
right. Please, that's all right. I hate to hear you think that. 21 to Wayne Street. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions from the council on items 4 through 9? If not, we'll take a motion to refer them to the Corporation Council.
I'll second that. I'll motion.
There you go.
Right.
Second.
Seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. That will lead us into unfinished business. Mr. Mallory?